Hi, I'm Peter Kalmström of the Swedish blog Supervegobloggen. In this presentation, I will talk about the environmental impact of meat. And before we get into that, I want to assure you that there are lots of other things that you might want to look at before you look at this presentation. There are lots of documentaries, a lot of lectures that are more deeply founded than mine. But when I get the chance, I like to speak about these things, and I wanted to put this out here also as another way of looking at it, maybe a different view, a different summary that I've put together for giving some lectures at certain times when people want to listen. So let's move into this and start with a presentation of me. I am the editor-in-chief of the Swedish blog Supervegobloggen. I'm a writer and I'm a member of a lot of different organizations, some Swedish, some international, and I'm also an activist. And on the picture to the right there, you see me in the center of Malaga, where I am speaking against the bullfighting. That's one of the things I'm against, of course. It's a really, really bad idea. And I take every chance to speak out against bullfighting, as I do with other types of maltreatment or abuse of animals. So that's a bit about me. I'm going to be talking about the environment in this presentation, and I do not have a doctorate in any kind of environmental studies. This is based on other people's science and my understanding of that science. I have been a teacher for 30 years. I'm used to explaining things. I'm used to learning new things also, of course, because I learn new things when teaching IT and explain them to others. That's what I've been doing for 30 years, and that's what I still keep doing when it comes to the environment. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. This lecture is about 40 minutes long. Usually when I do this in front of a crowd or an audience at least, I give about 40 minutes to the lecture, and I give about 20 minutes to the questions. And I do urge people to interrupt. Of course, that won't be possible in this format, but please do write comments if you want links to what I'm stating here, you want more information or anything. I'll be speaking about 90% of the time about the environment, and about 5% about ethics, and 5% about health. So very, very much focused on the environment. I have another lecture that I will be posting soon about ethics. I do urge you to see that one also, if you want. But health is not really my area. I have lots of recommendations when it comes to other sites and other presentations, but I won't be doing any health-related presentations. I know enough about the ethics, and I know about a lot about the environment, and those things I can speak about, and I will. So moving on. And that's the one. My main point in this presentation is that all environmental problems are caused by one of two issues. Either we waste the limited resources, we have one planet, and we want to use those resources that we have on this planet as wisely as we can. So when we do that, when we waste those resources, that creates environmental problems. The other problem is, of course, pollution, when we release unwanted substances. Those substances might be carbon dioxide, there might be methane, nitrous dioxide, or lots and lots of other substances that we don't want in nature. All substances, appear in nature, of course, even the poisonous ones. It's the concentration and the mixes that's the problem. So we want to look at what chemicals do we want, and where do we want them, and where do we not want them. And when we get chemical releases in places where we don't want them, then that's a bad thing, of course. So all environmental problems are caused by these two issues, waste or pollution, right? And my main point in this presentation is that eating animals demands more of our limited resources and causes more pollution than the eating of plants. So if you understand that point, well, then you've understood my presentation. There's no need to listen further. In the rest of my presentation, I'll give a lot of examples of limited resources that are wasted when we are eating animals, and pollution that's caused by us eating animals. That's what I'm going to be proving in this presentation. So let's talk about climate threats. When we often hear about this problem, the problem of eating animals, we hear about the cows farting, and that is a problem. But it's also something that's easy to make a joke out of. That's, yeah, it can't be that bad. They don't fart that much. And no, they don't. That's not the only problem. If the cows farting would be the only problem, then we wouldn't have to have this presentation, and we would also have a lot cleaner planet if that was the only problem. But there are a lot of climate threats being caused by animal agriculture. I'm going to go through some of those. Climate change, rainforest deforestation, water pollution, and water waste, of course, are huge issues. So this picture is just an illustration saying that there are a lot of climate threats being caused by animal agriculture. So the first thing we're going to start with, and the most important, most urgent thing, of course, is global warming. And when we're discussing this, we're looking at the trend. How warm is it going to be on the planet? And right now we're about 1 degree hotter than before the industrial age started. So we've already caused 1 degree more. And that's causing a lot of problems, as we see in the news every day. But the main question, the big question, is where are we going? And there are a lot of these RCP trend analysis. Where are we heading? And very simplistically, we can say that if we do everything that we decided to do in Paris, then we might get it to around 2 degrees. So double as much as we have now by the year 2100. And as you see, the trend is not going to be steady as it is now until the year 2100. It's going to be more and more each year. So already by the year 2050, we're going to be 1.5, 1.6, 1.8 at least, even if we do everything that we decided to do in Paris. And it's important to note that we're now almost 3 years after the Paris Agreement, and very, very few countries have done what they promised. Most of them don't even have plans for getting to the goals of the agreement. If we continue as we do now, if we continue burning all the coal, burning all the oil, and growing our population numbers and using our resources, of course, as we are now, and don't make any really, really drastic changes, then we're going to end up somewhere around 6 degrees. When it comes to the population numbers, before I kind of slide over that point there, the population number of humans is not the big problem. We have about 7.5 billion people, slowly edging towards 8. And with the current projections they look at, we're going to be around 10 to 11 billion. But the number of captive animals, the animals in farms and those kind of things, are about 70 billion. And of course, those animals, the animals that are stuck close together, cause much, much more problems than the humans do in general. And they also use a lot of resources. So that's a bigger problem. And if the humans on the planet keep eating more and more animals, then we'll end up in the RCP 8.5. No doubt about it. All right, so moving on to get a bit of perspective on carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide levels on the planet go up and down. They have been going up and down, as you see on this graph. This is a very long-term graph. This is showing 400,000 years before today. Zero there is 1950, and as you see, it's been going between 280 and 180. That's been the range we've been moving at. And it's been assumed and thought that 350 is bearable. We could live at 350. We are currently at 410. 2017 was the first year when we were constantly all year at 210. There have been days when we've been at 412. So we're much, much higher than the normal range, and we're much, much higher than we're allowed to be, or that we can sustain. So this is nothing normal. This is nothing sustainable, of course. So carbon dioxide is one of the big problems when it comes to the environment. So how dangerous is this global warming trend then? Well, 2016 was 1 degree above pre-industrial times, and of course it was a record year. We had lots of problems in 2016. 2017 continued in the same way, and 2018 looks to be even worse, especially with droughts and fires all over the world. Even in Sweden, we have huge problems with droughts and fires now, and that's not something that's common in a very damp country like Sweden. The 100 poorest nations at the Paris Agreement, they were pushing very hard and actually almost begging for a limit of 1.5 degrees. They are very, very aware that they will have the most problems when we're coming to 1.5 degrees. They will have the most problems with droughts. They will have the most problems with all kinds of change that's going to happen. And the main thing that we're going to lose is stability. So when we're looking at that, 6 degree goal, which it looks like we're heading for. The scientists that are looking at that, they are using words like catastrophe, extinction, superstorms. They're saying that large parts of the planet are inhabitable or will be uninhabitable for humans. They're also saying that conventional growing, which is of course the basis of our civilization, that will be impossible. And this has never happened in history. All our civilization is built on the premise that we plant things and it grows, and then we eat them after a while because we can rely on the weather being stable enough so that we can get the food after a few months or a few weeks or however long the growing cycle is. So 6 degrees will be very, very dangerous. These pictures to the right are not science fiction pictures. They're mostly pictures from 2016, including the Katrina storm. So 6 degrees is something we desperately need to avoid, no matter what. So let's look at greenhouse gases. We have cars, of course. Everybody knows that we should cut down on our driving. We should cut down on our transports with trucks and trains or whatever. Boats, of course, are also problems, and planes, of course. All those transports together, they amount to 13% of the emissions of greenhouse gases. Of course, we cannot ignore the cars. We cannot ignore the trucks. But even if we all buy Teslas tomorrow, even if we build Tesla trucks or whatever, even if we replace all of that, it's just going to be 13. We need to get to 100%. And if you know your percentages, if you know your math, you know that 13% is just a small piece. We cannot ignore any of the transportation. We cannot give tax exemptions like we do for flights. We need to count those things also, the 16,000 flights that are currently in the air every day on the planet. They need to be decreased, of course, yes. But it's only 13%, so we need to look at the other percent also, of course. And one of the other things that we need to look at is animal agriculture, and that is at least 14.5%. This is the low estimate. There are other estimates when it comes to greenhouse gases that are much, much higher, depending on how much you include in that. Do you include the transport of the meat of the cows, etc. Of course you should, in my opinion, but that is the low estimate, the 14.5. So I'm going to be moderate here, and I'm going to use that number. And I'm just going to throw it out here that no, we cannot ignore the animal agriculture either. That cannot be an exemption. If we're going to get to 0, we can't ignore the 14.5. Just as we can't ignore the flights, no, we can't ignore the transportation. All right, so this is a big thing. So moving on, we need to talk about food and carbon dioxide. Of course, when we eat things, we use carbon dioxide. Anything we produce or transport is using carbon dioxide or emitting carbon dioxide. So here is a comparison based on Swedish numbers. The best thing to eat in Sweden is no doubt cabbage. But even tomatoes, potatoes, oranges, and bananas are really low, as you see. It's 0.3 kilos of carbon dioxide per kilo of food. When we're looking at animal products, it's many, many times higher. And of course, bananas grow very badly in Sweden because of the lack of heat usually. So this comparison includes the transportation of the bananas from Spain or from South America to Sweden. So these are Swedish numbers, and as you see, even with that big transportation, even we could live on bananas much more easily or much more with fewer carbon dioxide emissions than if we're eating eggs, chicken, pigs, cheese, and beef, which is of course what people do a lot in Sweden. So the carbon dioxide is a huge problem, and a typical Swede uses about 10 to 11 metric tons of carbon dioxide every year, and the food impact of that on the carbon dioxide emissions is about 2 to 3 tons for the typical Swede. And vegans, of course, are much, much lower. They're about 500 kilos of carbon dioxide on the food bit. Then they can fly and do all kinds of other things, of course. There are heavy carbon dioxide vegetables also, like coffee and chocolate, for example, are really heavy in the carbon dioxide. But the general rule is that animal products are much, much higher in their emissions. So if you want to cut down on your carbon dioxide, cutting down on the animal products is, of course, a huge impact. There are other greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide also, and they are also very heavy in terms of pollution from the animal agriculture industry. Carbon dioxide, if you count that as 1, methane is 28 times more aggressive when it comes to influencing global warming, and nitrous dioxide is 300 times as dangerous. And there are a lot of emissions from these other gases also in the animal agriculture. So it's not just the carbon dioxide. That's all I want to say with that slide, really. So one calculation for this when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, if all the Swedes would use the meat-free Mondays rule, that they would skip meat totally on one day, that would include 233,000 cars, just taking them off the road, not using them at all. So that's the calculation for Sweden, and of course for the world or for whatever country, it's huge also. So these are huge changes. If we can get people to eat less meat or stop altogether, stop eating animals, that would make a huge impact in terms of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. All right, so that concludes my point on global warming and carbon dioxide emissions. That's a very important point, but it's very far from the only one. So I'm going to move on and talk about water. So this is a map of water stresses. This is the projection from 2013, and of course we know now that it's much worse in 2018 in most parts of the world already. And this is a projection how things are going to get in the world. But I find this map useful anyway, because it shows that large parts of the world are and will have problems with extremely high stress when it comes to water. So I just want to point out a few areas. First of all, of course, I want to point to Sweden. And Sweden are having huge problems in 2018. Britain is also having huge problems in 2018. So there are lots of areas that are already having huge problems with water. I also want to point out India and Pakistan, which both share the main water source there, except for the monsoon rains, of course, which creates a lot of problems every year with floods. Their main water source is the glaciers of the Himalayas, and those run down in the Ganges rivers, among others. And that water source is, of course, heavily polluted and heavily used for all kinds of agriculture. And also it's shared between Pakistan, actually not the Ganges, but a lot of the water resources from the Himalayas are shared between Pakistan and India. And of course, those two countries are not the best of friends at good times. And when they have bad times, things will get worse, of course. Also, those two nations are, of course, both of them nuclear nations. So that's going to be a problem in the future, no doubt about it. All right, so there's lots of areas, of course. Australia is a big red sign. The west coast of the US, including California, of course, has had huge problems with water. Also, Syria is a really good example, because Syria had a big drought for 6 years before they went into the war. And of course, that wasn't the only reason, but people tend to get, in a bad mood when there's not enough water. And of course, a lot of people in the animal agriculture industry in Syria lost their jobs when they had to close down because there was not enough water to support that kind of industry anymore. So of course, we need to take care of our water, and we need to save the water. Water is one of those limited resources that we need to worry about. So when we're talking about saving water, usually we're talking about taking shorter showers and turning off the tap when we're brushing our teeth, stuff like that, which are of course sensible things to do, no doubt about it. But when we're looking at the big picture, we should look at where does the water go. And in Europe, industry is a big user of fresh, clean water. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about salt water. We have plenty of salt water in the sea. But we're talking about fresh, clean water. And industry uses a lot of that. Household uses about 15% in Europe. But agriculture uses 32% in Europe. And as you see, in the other parts of the world, agriculture uses the major part. And anytime that we're discussing agriculture as a whole, we should keep in mind that almost 70% of global agriculture is intended to create meat, either directly or indirectly by growing feed for the animals. So that's what we're evaluating here. We're thinking about the alternative of not eating meat. So if we stop that, we could cut down 70% of the agriculture use of water, of course, because we're giving that to animals instead of eating it ourselves, which is, of course, very wasteful when it comes to water. So let's look at some examples. How much water does your food use? To the right here, we have some really good examples, numbers to remember. One egg is about 175 liters. That's about the same amount that we find in a really nice bathtub or a really long shower. 1 liter of milk is 600 liters, so 3 bathtubs for 1 liter of cow's milk. That's what we're talking about here. And 1 kilo of beef is at least 10,000 liters. And of course, the cow does not drink those 10,000 liters. That's a very common misconception. It's all the feed that's needed, all the clean water that's needed to produce all the feed for the cow during its lifetime of typically 3 to 6 years of beef production. And it's the same for all animal products. We see on the graph to the left here, we see lettuce is about 15 gallons per kilo of lettuce, potatoes 30 gallons. These are American numbers in gallons. Apples is high also, wheat is even higher. But then when we're coming into the animal products, we go into a totally different scale. We have the eggs, the chicken, the pork, the butter. There you go, we have to have 3 of them to fit in there. And beef, they're about 10,000 liters or 2,500 gallons as we looked at before. So if you want to save water, stop eating animal products. That's as simple as that, really, because that uses up a lot of water. All right. So we call this invisible water. Of course, it's not visible because you don't see it right there on the plate. But if you're eating one portion of vegetables, that's about 32 liters. If you're eating some pasta, then it goes up to 169 liters, and a slice of meat, then you're up to an example here of 1550 liters. So that makes a huge difference what you eat. So that's another example of eating animals wastes limited resources. Moving on to land use. Of course, again, we only have one planet. We will probably end up being somewhere around 11 billion humans. 71% of the planet's land is actually not land. 71% of the planet's surface area is not land, but it's water. It's salty seawater. And of course, it's difficult for us to live there. And I usually ask people at this point if they're going into the Mars One program, which is a program for migrating to Mars. They're planning on sending 30 people in the year 2030 on a one-way trip to Mars. And I am signed up for that, but I think I'm probably not smart enough and too old to be chosen for that. But if you want to get rid of me, then please go into that and vote for me to go to Mars. But seriously, I do not think that that's a solution. It's too long into the future, and I think we need to take care of this planet. I want to save as many of the humans on this planet and as many of the animals on this planet as is possible. So we need to take care of this planet, and we need it for a lot of things. Of course, we need it for carbon binding, because we need to get rid of that. You remember the 412 parts per million that we have in the air today of carbon dioxide. We need to take that out and put it back into the earth. And the only way to do that, as that we know of right now, is planting forests. So that's what we should be doing. Of course, we need a lot more forests. And of course, forests are good also because they create oxygen. And they do use space. They need space. So we need to think about that. Of course, we also need wild areas for the wild animals to live in. Of course, we care about those also. And the picture there to the right is from India. And some parts of the planet are really overcrowded. So we really need to think about that too. How do we give space to humans also? Because humans need space, animals need space, forests need space. And so we need to take care of our space. And about a third of the land of the planet is actually used directly for producing meat. And that's a huge portion, a third being used specifically for producing meat, either as for grazing or for growing feed for the animals. All right, moving on. Land use then again. 70% of farmland is used for grazing or growing feed. We've already covered that, and that's about a third of the land use of the land of the planet, which is of course a lot. Also, we've lost about 50% of the trees in 100 years. And why are we cutting down the trees? Well, we'll get to that. But of course, we need those trees, and we need them back. We're always complaining about the people in South America and the people in Indonesia and Malaysia and those places that are cutting down their rainforests. But in fact, the rainforests of Europe, we didn't have rainforests per se, but we did have big forests. They were cut down thousands of years ago. So we've already done that bit for ourselves. We need to take care and replant those forests again. That needs to be part of our future plan. We need those trees back. That's how our planet is supposed to work. And that's the planet that we had for millennia, many millennia, that we were able to survive on. We will not be able to survive on a planet with fewer trees than now. It's not sustainable. So we need that oxygen to breathe, if nothing else. All right, moving on. So why are we doing deforestation then? Why are we cutting down the trees? Well, there are lots of reasons, of course. We use the timber, we use the pulp, and we create paper, of course. And of course, we need to cut down on those things also. But if you're looking at the size of these arrows, you see that beef is a huge arrow here coming from Brazil and going into the Caribbean and also to the United States and over to the Middle East and North Africa. That's a big issue, so they're exporting a lot of beef. And of course, that beef production is happening on areas where they've cut down the forests. We're also producing huge arrows here in orange tints of palm oil and soybeans. And we hear a lot of complaints here about all the soybeans and all the palm oil that vegans are eating. And yes, that is a valid concern. We should minimize our use of soybeans and palm oil. But those products are really effective in terms of land use, actually, when it comes to producing protein. So let's think again about that, and let's look at what are we actually doing with the palm oil and the soybeans that we are producing in Malaysia, Indonesia, and South America. What's happening with those things? Why are we cutting down forests to start producing palm oil and soybeans? What is used? Are we giving it all to the vegans? Is that what we're doing? In fact, it's not. About 90% of all imported soy is used as animal feed because it is an effective ingredient. So when you're looking at an egg, when you're looking at a piece of meat, especially from pigs or rabbits or mink or some other animal, which you might not eat the mink, but anyhow, when you're producing animal products in general, most likely they contain huge amounts of soy. It doesn't say so. If you look on the ingredients list of an egg, it just says egg. But that chicken has probably eaten a lot of soy and palm oil also. So that's part of the mix. They can't just eat soy, they need to put something to mix it together to make it stick together. So they use palm oil for that because it's a really effective ingredient. And also, of course, to include more fat in the diet to make the animals grow faster. So both soy and palm oil are ingredients that are used in feeding animals, and of course then we eat the animals, the humans eat the animals. Also, when we're looking at farmed fish, same thing there. The feed that we give to the fish often includes soy also. So if you want to cut down on your soy usage, if you want to cut down on your palm oil usage, cut down on your eating animals. That's my main point here. Moving on. Next pollution we're gonna look at is defecation. If you look at the top middle picture there, you see a pile of dung on a green meadow, and of course that is not a problem. Spread out animals taking a shit here and there is not a problem in the world. A small part of all the defecation that happens on the 70 billion, remember that number? 70 billion captive animals in the world. A small part of that becomes fertilizer, and that's a good thing, of course. We need fertilizer to grow things, especially the way we grow things now. That's another discussion. We can change that and use less fertilizer. But as I said, 70% of what we're growing is aimed at producing feed. So, so fertilizer is a problem in the world. And of course, when we're fertilizing too much, we get global dead zones, and we kill off the cyanobacteria, and we get too much nutrition in the water that gets flooded off from agriculture. And that kills off the cyanobacteria. Why should I care about cyanobacteria? Well, they produce 50% of the oxygen that we get. So if we're cutting down the forest and we're killing the cyanobacteria, we're effectively killing off the two main sources of oxygen in the atmosphere. And that's going to cause trouble also. And the fodder contains extra amounts of nitrogen because it's high in protein, and the animal bodies can't take up too much protein, just as the human bodies can't take up too much protein, so it goes out, and that contains a lot of nitrogen, which also pollutes, of course. And the main problem is, of course, here that we're putting a huge amount of animals into a small contained area. Tens of thousands of chickens in a barn is a very normal number. Of course, pigs are also very tightly confined. And all that waste, all that shit, to be literal and explicit, creates lots of problems. And there are lots of areas in the world, including the Baltic and including the Gulf of Mexico that we see there, of course, yes. So this is a big problem. When we put animals close together, all the pollution that they create in terms of feces, in terms of urine, creates huge problems and huge pollution, and we need to avoid that. So that's yet another problem with the animal agriculture industry. Air pollution is another problem, another pollution problem. And of course, the defecation that we just talked about is part of that. Also the transports. We do transport all of those animals. It's legal within the European Union to transport for 23 hours throughout the EU. In Sweden, it's illegal for 8 hours. And of course, that creates a huge amount of problems. Dehydration, we talked about the water wastage. Dehydration creates a lot of dust. That's the main problem in many areas, that we have very dusty atmosphere. And this is a real-time map, or it's not a real-time map right now, but it's an image of a real-time map of the pollution. And as you see, there are lots of areas, especially around Beijing, around Delhi, and those large areas where there's lots and lots of pollution. Of course, traffic and all those things cause a lot of problems, but animal agriculture is also a huge contributor to these problems in many, many different ways. Ammonia is something that's used a lot to try to keep hens or chickens clean. When you put them in the barn, you need to keep it sterile somehow, and use ammonia for that also. And also it's part of the urine, of course, that they produce. So ammonia is a huge pollutant when it comes to air quality. The solution, of course, to this might be to wear a mask like they do in large parts of Asia a lot of the time. It might also be to build a dome like you see in the top middle picture there, which they've done in Beijing, so that the diplomat kids can play outside, or rather inside the dome. Of course, that's not a solution for large scale, it's only for the rich kids, basically. If you want to see a real horror story about air pollution, you should look at the 2005 documentary from BBC called Global Dimming. It talks about that our entire planet, the air quality of the entire planet, is being more and more polluted, and that is actually holding back our global warming. So that's connected to that. So it's a really, really scary concept once you start looking into that. But I'm going to leave air pollution now and move on to the next step, and that's fish. So far we've been talking about meat, but of course we're talking about all animal products. we do need the fish in the oceans also. They're part of the ecosystem. And no, I do not recommend you to stop eating meat and start eating more fish instead. Fish are not vegetables and they can suffer just as all other animals can. So, some numbers that are easy to remember about fish. Now, 50% of the oxygen comes from the ocean, and that's of course important for us, and that's also the levels of cyanobacteria that have decreased. To put that differently, the levels of cyanobacteria and other living sea animals that have decreased by 50% since 1970. So the ecosystem has lost about half of its individuals. Well, if you call cyanobacteria individuals, but the counts are down by 50% since 1970. And that's of course really, really fast in terms of biology, in terms of the history of the planet. So that's moving really, really fast. 90% is a good number to remember also. When you're catching shrimp, it's of course very difficult to just catch the shrimp. Usually you catch other things also, and that's called bycatch, the rest of the stuff that you catch, and that number is about 90% on shrimp. So when you're eating 1 kilo of a shrimp, you're actually killing 10 kilos of living things from the ocean. Also, 90% is the decrease in large fish since 1950 in the oceans. So we've lost a lot of the large fish. That includes, of course, tuna fish, which has been hit really, really hard. 90% of the fisheries are either overextended or extremely overextended in the world. One thing to consider here is that pigs and chickens eat a lot of fish, which is, of course, crazy when you think about it. That's not natural in any way, shape, or form. But that's because we give them feed, of course. Also, plastic is a huge issue. We should remember that of the plastic patch in the Pacific, about 50% of that is actually fishing gear, nets and other abandoned things that have been thrown into the ocean and ended up in the Pacific plastic garbage patch. So when you're eating fish, you're contributing to the plastic pollution also in a huge way. So I'm not recommending to eat fish at all. The movie to the right that you've seen playing while I've been talking about fish is a movie from the Faroe Islands, where they have a tradition of killing pilot whales, which is a form of dolphin. They do that, as you see here, by running them with boats, pushing them into land, and then running out with hooks and knives and killing them there. And of course they claim it's pain-free and natural, and it's a tradition, and we shouldn't bother them about it. And this goes on year after year. And of course it's horrible, and just as horrible as any other type of animal slaughter that goes on needlessly. And it's all needless. That's one of my main points in this. All right, moving on from fish, I'm going to move on to wild animals. The number of wild animals have also decreased by 50% since 1970. So when you're trying to count all the animals, all the wild animals, the numbers in total have gone down by 50% since 1970. That's a horrible statistics to go into. Please do look into that. Please research it. And I'll be happy to put links in the comments if you want. But that's the fact, and it's based on science, and it's hard to count these numbers, of course, but it's the best estimates that we have. So let's look at why are those numbers decreasing. Well, the most important reason is land use, that people are taking the wild lands and making something else out of them. Human habitats. So the animal habitats are becoming human habitats, or very, very often they're becoming agricultural lands. And as soon as we're talking about agriculture, you should remember that number that I mentioned before, that 70% of all agriculture is directly directed towards producing meat, either via grazing or via feed. Also, of course, pollution is a huge issue for the animals too. They rely on clean air, clean water, and all those things. So when we have bad air and bad water, the animals will get affected too. And of course, hunting is a big issue. There is no help from hunters for the wild animals, of course. And when you're looking at, well, I can go on talking about hunting for a long while. Let's just say it's contributing largely to diminishing the numbers of wild animals also. And it's not something that's needed, and it's not something that's beneficial for the animals in any way, shape, or form, of course. And of course, it doesn't help the environment either. So hunting is a bad idea, no matter how you look at it. Moving on to some myths. Of course, it's natural to eat meat. Well, yes, we have been eating meat for a long time, but there's nothing natural about what we're doing. In the picture to the right, you see a movie from a Swedish pig farm. Of course, that's not how pigs live in the wild. There's nothing natural about forcing them to live that closely together. Pigs are, of course, highly intelligent animals that likes to search for food. They like to dig. They build nests. They're very intelligent and so on. To the left, you see a picture of a nose ring that you put in the nose of the calf so that it shouldn't disturb the mother by drinking the mother's milk from the mother's udder. There's of course nothing natural about that whatsoever. There's nothing natural about drinking the milk from another animal at an adult age, of course. So using animals at all is not something we need, and it's not something that's natural at all. So there's never been such a large consumption. It's growing exponentially a lot. In Sweden, the numbers are 50% plus since 1990, so it's growing very, very fast, and that's happening in the world. As people get richer, they tend to eat more meat, more animals. The problems is not the animals, it's the animals in captivity, the animals that we put together in barns. That's the problem, as I have said multiple times in this presentation. So there's nothing natural about the way we eat animals right now, of course. Another point that I want to make in this that's not directly related to the environment, but that's economics. And when we're talking about pollution in general, the rule is that the polluter pays. So if you're polluting something, then you pay for cleaning that up. That's exactly the opposite of what's happening in animal agriculture. They get tax-free diesel, they get a lot of exemptions from rules that apply to other businesses and individuals, and they also get 40% of the EU's budget. That's for agriculture subsidies. So somewhere around 40 billion euros every year is given directly to producing meat, again via feed or directly to grazing animals. So we could of course do a lot more interesting and beneficial things for humans and for animals if we stopped spending that much money on agriculture subsidies. One glaring example of this problem is the bullfighting that we see a picture to the right here. That tradition, which is not only Spanish by the way, is of course horrible for both the animals, both the bulls and the horse there also, and it would not be sustainable economically. Of course, it's a waste of environment also, but it would not be sustainable economically without the 100 million euros every year given in direct subsidies to the bullfighting rings, the bullfighting schools, and all that. So that's just one example of an extreme use of animals that is being subsidized directly by the European Union. And there are examples like that all over the place. The more you dig into it, the more horrible it gets. So, more about politics. This is farmers protesting that they don't get enough subsidies. They're spraying milk on the EU building in Brussels. And as you see, they're burning hay there, and they're behaving in a really, really bad way. And I challenge anyone to give me an examples of vegans behaving in this way ever in the history of the world. It has never happened, but there are lots of examples of militant animal farmers behaving in this way. So they are very entitled and militant. Of course, that's, I would declare that the definition of a militant. All right, moving on. Cancer is, of course, a health issue there, one of the big ones, and the WHO has declared that meat, processed meat specifically, is a cancerogen just like tobacco is. And it influences lots of different types of cancer, and it causes them directly. So that's yet another reason to stay away from meat, of course. Antibiotics is another one. When you look at antibiotic-resistant bacteria, it gets really, really scary. There are more and more of those every year. About 25,000 people every year die by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. There hasn't been any new antibiotics developed since 1987, and it's really costly to research these things, so there's very little research into new antibiotics going on. And once we lose antibiotics, once we can't use those anymore because the antibiotic-resistant bacteria are so prevalent, then we're talking about something like the medical dark ages. And the more you know about this, the scarier it gets. So, what are we doing to help this? Well, we're not doing much. As I said, the research is not going on, and we're wasting antibiotics a lot. We're eating a lot of antibiotics, of course, for humans to keep us from being sick, and that's worthwhile in most cases, of course. But 80% of all antibiotics are given to animals, and that's not because of concern of the animals. It's because we want the animals to grow as fast as possible and not get sick from being so close together. So 80% of all antibiotics are given to animals on the planet globally. And that's, of course, a huge problem, especially when it's done to fish that's grown in farms. Because most often those are grown in the sea, so you're basically pouring antibiotics into the sea. At the present moment, about 1/3 of all chicken and pig meat that is sold in Sweden contains antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So this is a huge problem, and it's very, very much connected to the animal agriculture industry. Finally, we have some good news. It is possible and recommendable to be vegan, and you can be healthy as a vegan also. Mr. Universe in 2014 was a vegan, and the strongest man in Germany is a vegan, and there are lots of Swedish healthy vegans here that I'm showing a little video of. So a lot of athletes are becoming vegan, staying vegan, and thriving and having successes as vegans also. So that's part of the good news. It's health. It's good for you also. It's not only good for the environment and for the animals, it's good for you also to be vegan. And another thing, it's good. There is good food to eat, and it's not just cucumber. This cucumber is a bit of a joke. There's a Swedish doctor that wrote an article saying that being vegan is crazy. You need to eat 18 kilos of cucumber to get all the nutrients that you need. And that's correct. If you just eat cucumber, then you need to eat 18 kilos of cucumber every day. But of course, vegans do not just eat cucumber. They eat a lot of other things too. And that's what I'm showing in this picture. This is from my private Facebook album of vegan food. And as you see, it's just normal food. It's really, really good and colorful vegan food, of course. But there's nothing special here, and you can make anything vegan. Every day there are new products coming out, so from a taste perspective, it's not difficult to be vegan at all. And so you can eat anything really. Just Google vegan lasagna or whatever, and you'll find lots and lots of recipes for whatever you want to cook and make it vegan. So as I see it, as a conclusion here, we have a choice. We as humans have a choice where we should go from here. Should we go to an emergency landing or a crash landing? And an emergency landing would be difficult. We're going down fast. We need to go down fast. We need to stop our consumption. We need to stop destroying this planet. We need to stop doing a lot of things. And one of the most important things we need to stop doing is eating animals, because it's certainly not helping us or the animals in any way, shape, or form. It's destroying us in all the ways that I've shown in this presentation. So if we don't do that, we're going to stop consuming anyway. We're going to have a crash landing, and that's going to change our way of life too. And that's what we're seeing in the poorer countries already. That's what we saw in Syria. That's part of it. It started with problems in the environment, and then it became war. And that's what we're seeing in lots of areas, that conflicts are driven by hardships. So a crash landing, we don't know how that's going to look, but we know it's not going to look good. So I strongly, of course, I'm a proponent of an emergency landing where we need to stop wasting resources, such as eating animals. There are a lot of documentaries that I recommend viewing. Forks Over Knives is about health. Vegucated is also about health. Food Inc. is about the economy of these things, the lobbying and the subsidies. Earthlings is about the ethics and how we treat our fellow Earthlings. Cowspiracy is about the environment. So I've borrowed a lot of the facts from the Cowspiracy movie. You should definitely see all of those. And hopefully you've already seen them before you've seen these, because they're of course much better told and funded than this presentation. So you should definitely look into that. There are lots of books. The classic, The Jungle, from a long time ago. That's the first expose of the slaughterhouses, eating animals, from Jonathan Safran. Animal Liberation, Peter Singer's book. We Animals is a really good book too. Guns, Germs and Steel and Sapiens are books that tells us how we got here and why we are there we are now. They're historical books that have taught me a lot. There are also, of course, a lot of websites. Happy Cow is one of my favorites. When I'm traveling, I often go into Happy Cow to find nice vegan restaurants wherever I happen to be. Google, I mean, these facts that I've shown here are not secrets that I've found anywhere hidden. They're very, very visible, and you can just find them on Google. If you're looking into the health aspects, there's a lot of science at nutritionfacts.org. All right, thank you for watching this presentation, and please feel free to contact me or send me any questions in the comments on Facebook or however else you want. Thank you for watching.